The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome everyone. Um, so throughout this presentation, if you have any questions, put them in the question box. I'll check the chat box, but the chat box you can use if y'all want to make comments to each other or just make comments and state things. But if you have questions for the panelists, please use the question. I don't know, what is it called? Button, I guess. And I'm Ivania Woods, your moderator for this panel. The reason that we're starting a couple of minutes behind is I was waiting on a panelist, but they have not, I don't see them over there. If you're there, just text or email me if you're under a different name. I don't see your name, so I haven't made you a panelist. But we're gonna go ahead and get started. I'm gonna share my screen really quickly, and I wanna give a bit of an overview of what you can expect of what we're talking about today so that you have that idea. And we will do that. So this is Reproaction's Movement Building Discussion Panel. We series, and today we're talking about coalition building. We've talked about leadership development or diversity. We've talked about centering the most marginalized in our work, and we're wrapping up this discussion series this afternoon talking about coalition building. So a little bit of today's agenda. I'm doing the welcome and interview right now. Welcome. So glad that y'all could take time this afternoon to be here. We are then I'm going to introduce the panelists. We're going to get into the discussion panel, and there will be time for audience Q&A at the end. These are like the time frames just in case, but we may end earlier than 4:30. So just keep that in mind that instead of the times being what we're beholden to, it's really the items. So just know that. And I want to give a little bit of a background on Reproaction. Wow, I made a mistake there. That's what I get. We're working to increase access to abortion and advance reproductive justice. That is our mission. That is our claim to fame. We are proud of our left flank analysis and are not in this fight to protect the past or maintain the status quo. We celebrate legal, accessible, and funded abortion as a great thing. We hold the right to parent and the right to raise children in safe and healthy communities as equally sacred in this struggle for dignity. And we aim to increase the use of direct action in accomplishing those goals, hence the name, Reproaction, right? So the what and why of coalition building, I just want to provide a little bit of an overview of that. What we do in liberation movements and liberatory work, there's this assumption that building people power is what we need to do, that is how we work to resist, and that's the most effective way. So we work under that assumption. So if building people power is our way to get to liberation, then we have to make coalition building a part of our work. Okay, so with coalition building, I'm borrowing from Kimberly Crenshaw here, in the way that we think about coalitions. She divided these up as intragroup coalitions and intergroup coalitions, just to think a bit more intersectionally about our work. Intragroup coalitions, or when we think about groups that may, for political reasons, lean on a salient identity or to get something done. So you could think about women, but there's intersections within the group of women by race, by sexuality, by ability, by class. So even though everyone within that group identifies as women, there's Black women, there's Black poor women, Black wealthy women, there's, Black trans women, or, Latinx or Latina or Hispanic, depending on how you identify. Not that those are should be conflated, but we haven't settled on a term, and I am not getting into that in this presentation. But just thinking about those intersections, even though you may be in rely on one, like make one of those identity salient. So when we talk about Black people, that gets crossed by sex, by class, by ability, sexuality as well. And then intergroup coalitions are when groups who, not that you don't share some identities, but you come together to build a bigger coalition, right? So groups who work on race, groups that work on gender issues, groups that work on class, groups and economic issues where class is related, and so forth, right? Those are your intergroup coalitions where you're coming together and merging or converging on issues and working on them from multiple angles. Okay, but we recognize that individuals within groups have multiple identities, that so groups are composed of people with multiple identities, and that movements are composed of groups of people with multiple, and that is what makes us strong in this work. That's what that is why we need to work so diligently on inclusivity and making sure that we're making spaces, creating spaces, developing spaces in ways where people feel included and that their voices are heard. And then intergroup coalition building must be based on shared goals as opposed to shared values. And that makes you think, you hear that initially and you may be like, wait, what? Not shared values? Not necessarily. You want to make sure that you are coming together for the same purpose. When we think about issues that we're working on, it doesn't mean that we share the same values. And what that does is it opens us up to work across the aisle, to work with organizations and groups of people who disagree with us on some other things. We may be on opposing sides, but on this particular issue, we should be together. That does not happen very often, but it does happen. I can use an example of, for instance, you have, we're here, Reproaction, reproductive work, right? And you have your anti-abortion people who self-identify as pro-life. And meanwhile, reproductive justice is more comprehensive than just abortion access. We work on maternal and infant mortality, HIV, maternity leave, parental leave, equal pay, all of these other things. And when you basically people who identify as pro-life, immigration, reform and issues and childcare and all of that, if you're pro-life, then you should also want babies and children and parents to have what they need. But as we've seen, these quote unquote pro-life people do not do anything that really lives up to the identity of being pro-life, right? Ideally, it should. We should be able to work together on other things, even though we disagree on abortion, but we do not. So, yeah. Anywho, I am your moderator today. My name is Ivania Woods. I'm the Senior Outreach Producer at Reproaction. I'm a Black feminist sociologist specializing in social inequalities, political economies, and movements. In reproductive justice spaces, I primarily lead and organize campaigns to increase birth control and abortion access, address maternal and infant mortality rates, and decriminalizing HIV. I also discuss reproductive justice issues as a co-host of Women's Issues, Women's Voices, which is a weekly feminist community radio show that airs Mondays at 7 p.m. Central on KOPN Columbia. You can listen from anywhere by going to kopn.org at whatever time that corresponds with your time zone. Listen, every second Monday, you can hear me and my colleagues discussing a book by a woman author, which I lead those discussions. And another week, if we have like 5 Mondays, I typically interview someone who is doing fabulous work around reproductive justice, and we discuss reproductive justice issues. So the first panelist I'm going to introduce this afternoon is Diane Burkholder. Hope you approve of this photo. I told you I had plenty. I was like, I'm going to go with this one.
Okay.
Diane is a consultant and community organizer. She is a cisgender, Black mixed race, queer equity consultant and community organizer who recently relocated back to California after spending 9 years in Kansas City, Missouri. She is the founder of the DB Approach, providing anti-oppression and social justice facilitation, coaching, and training. Diane co-founded One Struggle KC, a movement for Black Lives affiliated organization. She also co-founded the Missouri HIV Justice Coalition, which is the first thing that we worked on together, I think. She sucked me into that. Hence my work on criminalizing HIV. I didn't know what I was showing up for, you guys, but I do know now. And honestly, if you don't know about the criminalization of HIV, please do some research on that. Which is focused on improving the state's HIV criminalization laws, and co-chaired for the American Humanist Association's LGBTQ Alliance, focusing on secular activism and equity. So during her downtime, when she's not chasing sunsets or traveling across the country, she lives under the roof of her cat, Rosa Parks. Our next panelist is Tanesha Henson. They are the campaign coordinator at Reproaction, or a campaign coordinator at Reproaction. Tanesha uses they, them pronouns. You can also refer to them as TEN. They are Black, queer, pro-abortion, Sagittarius, and abolitionist, and they are an avid Afrofuturism reader, a clinic escort, trained abortion doula, and an aspiring astrologist and tarot reader. So that is the angle Tanesha is coming from, which is going to be really great for this panel. Medvi is not here yet. I'm just doing a quick check to see. No. All right. Potentially won't be making it, but Tim is here. So Tim Williams is the Outreach and Advocacy Manager at Missouri Family Health Council. Tim has extensive experience in organizing and community engagement with a variety of issues that include reproductive health, LGBTQIA equality, and health equity. Tim has previously and currently works to facilitate advocacy actions through coalition activities. Tim holds a Master of Public Policy Administration degree from the University of Missouri St. Louis. Our, I guess, what would you call it? Brother, sister, sibling? Yeah, we'll go with sibling college. I went to Mizzou, University of Missouri's flagship campus, which is in Columbia, Missouri, which is where I am now and where I guess I will be. So you get to see all of our pretty faces this afternoon. I want to thank everybody for joining us, taking time out of your day. Once again, appreciating that. Some key things. We're going to get into these questions, just going to dive right in because I've been talking long enough and I know that you want to hear from the panelists. So diving right in, I'm going to start us off with this question. What are some key things to consider when starting a coalition? I know that Tim and Diane have experience with this. Not so sure about Tenacia, but Tenacia, please feel free to jump in, to provide input. I'm going to start us out with Diane. Are you off mute? Yes.
Hey, I was muted, so I get for talking mess. I said, you put me on first because I drug you into a coalition. Thank you kindly. Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking time out of your days. I know folks are zoomed out and fatigued. I'm really excited about this conversation. And for me, really thinking about this topic has shifted, particularly in the last year. Like Avanya said, I lived in Kansas City for 9 years. I consider myself a half Midwesterner, half Californian. I spent half my life in South Dakota, 9 years, came to California for 18, and then went back to Missouri for 9. So I equal split in the middle. And I have found, because of where I've lived geographically, because of my identities, that I have been in the middle of a lot of different communities and not fit exactly in one. I think a lot of us can relate to that. And I've seen that as of naturally becoming an organizer because of not having a neat box for me to fit in. Avanya and I met prior to doing coalition work together. We met actually when she was starting to get to know Kansas City and the organizing scene there. And so I believe that like the coalition building started before I brought her into the HIV Justice Coalition, because Avanya was somebody who was trying to get to know particularly other Black organizers across the state. And for those of you that are not in Missouri or not the Midwest, folks do, we can get like very territorial or get very much in our silos. And Avanya, I really appreciated that she was just reaching out and trying to connect with lots of folks. Speaking of thinking about coalitions and starting them, the formal coalition that Avanya mentioned, the HIV Justice Coalition, was not started by myself. I was asked to help facilitate and bring on the HIV Justice Coalition, which at the time had a different name, by a woman living with HIV by the name of Latricia Miles, who works at the Kansas City Care Clinic. We worked together. I worked in the evaluation department. I had done HIV work for years, both prevention and care, and had just gotten to Kansas City not even a full year. And so I believe it was 2012. And Latricia, who was a woman living with HIV, who was a peer counselor, who was very much versed in HIV services, became aware of HIV criminalization and asked me to help. And I did not know about HIV criminalization. And I quickly realized how much this was not a discussion, particularly in HIV, particularly for folks that did like case management services. It was just a waiver, you know, knowing that you knew these laws existed and that was about it. And so for me, when Latricia asked, although I, you know, had done HIV work, I'm not a person who is living with HIV. And so I thought it was really important, one, to take Latricia's lead as a woman who had been doing this work and is living with HIV, but also to ask her where I could step in without stepping toes. How could I leverage my privilege of somebody who didn't work in the same department as her, as somebody who had other connections outside of HIV and was an organizer? How could I help get folks to come to really just education and learning about even what HIV criminalization was for folks that were living and not living with HIV? And so in that instance, a lot of times I think coalitions come about because of a central issue, and maybe folks have a lot of education, but they're just kind of all over the place. Or maybe there's been some discord between some organizations or folks, or maybe there's been some transition, and then folks want to get back together, and that's how coalitions are formed. In this instance, it was really starting from like a very basic, what is HIV criminalization, what isn't? And we can see that it took, you know, almost 10 years for a law to get passed. Not the best law, it's kind of a trash law. That's another discussion. But it took 10 years for this coalition, going through all these ebbs and flows, through almost 10 years in order to be able to get some legislation passed. And I know, and we've talked about this with Latricia, is that when we first started, we're like, oh, this will be a couple years, 3 years. You know, we'll get some people together, we'll raise hell, we'll get some people will get agitated, and then boom. Well, one, not understanding the political process, and two, how absolutely slow it is, particularly in Missouri. Knowing then that it would take a full decade, almost a full decade, I think is something that I wish we had thought about from the jump. And so thinking about starting a coalition, I think the number one thing is to kind of set a timeline of how long it'll take for you to possibly reach your goals. You have your ideal timeline and then what it could possibly take, because I think getting the morale and getting folks clear expectations of how long this could take lets people know about the clear expectations. But when we set people up and we think, oh, it's a 6 month, a year commitment, then people get aggravated for various number of reasons, usually due to lack of patience or frustration due to how slow the work moves. And then they leave, and then you sometimes have to start again. So that was a roundabout story. But for me, it's really understanding how long it'll take, and then also to who are the folks that have not been in these conversations to begin with.
Okay, so I just realized something, like when talking about coalitions, and I made those points in the overview, but I debated about this and went back and forth about this a bit. If I wanted to distinguish between the difference, if I wanted to distinguish between working in coalition and working collaboratively, because there are collaboratives and there are coalitions, and a lot of people don't really necessarily see the difference, but the point that you're making about making sure that people have that timeline and know what they're coming for, the purpose of that coalition. Coalitions are issue based. So you have a reason that you are bringing these groups together or bringing these people together. And once that's accomplished, the need for the coalition disappears and goes away. But collaboratives are organizations that don't necessarily work on the same things, but there's some overlap, but they work on multiple issues and multiple things together. So there is not necessarily an end to that collaborative, because there will always be things that need to be worked on. Coalitions are formed with the thought that they won't always be needed, because you'll accomplish what you've come together to accomplish. And so, yeah, that timeline is important. Absolutely. So Tim, tell us a little bit more about your experience, because most of my experience with you is also working in coalition on the Healthy Families Priorities. I know when we were working, well, that too, because you the Healthy Families Priorities Coalition, but also
we have crossed a lot.
Yeah, also the Right Time Initiative, working on birth control access here in Missouri. So yeah, what are some key things to consider when starting a coalition?
So I mean, a lot of what Diane touched on is true and holds true to myself as well. I would say, like, when thinking of forming and then storming, when it comes to your coalition work, is you have to kind of come together with some sort of shared priority or goal when it is that sort of coalition making. And so like you're bringing together these sort of organizations that are working kind of in their own sort of networks or silos, and they need sort of maybe guidance or common like organization or I'm sorry, you all cut out for a second. I apologize. Can you still hear me? Oh, I'm so sorry. So again, you have those sort of shared goals when it comes to forming a coalition. And it's really also important to have some sort of strong backbone organization. And so thinking of how you all can have a greater collective impact. And so as you all come together, you're thinking how all of your activities can be mutually reinforcing and beneficial to the sort of entire group. So as that, so for an example, we at MFHC, or Missouri Family Health Council, we convene what's called the Healthy Families Priorities Coalition, which is this large group of this coalition, which consists of multiple organizations that kind of work towards this ultimate goal, essentially, of fostering or creating healthy families through legislative priorities and pushing forward proactive legislation or beating back nasty stuff within the Missouri legislature. And so we recognize that we come to the table with this overall goal of fostering healthy families, but we all know that we have our own expertise in certain legislative priorities or legislative buckets, if you will. So there's a focus on infant maternal mortality. There's a STI, reducing STI rates in Missouri. There's a reproductive health and family planning bucket. And so we know that not everyone comes to the table knowing everything, because we need to know when to step back and when to move forward. And so bringing people together that can deliver expertise in certain buckets. And then so when we all are, again, bringing that knowledge as a collective unit, we're able to foster this beautiful sort of table of expertise when it comes to all these sort of policies that in the long term affect all Missouri families and individuals. And then, Vanya, you kind of touched on like work when it comes to moving forward and access to contraception within the state of Missouri, is that we are bringing together people who, again, have that sort of shared goal of creating a sustainable environment when it comes to accessing family planning services and contraception. So bringing everyone to the table, again, with that ultimate goal of pushing back against barriers that prevent access to contraception.
Okay, yeah, I really like that. I appreciate to drawing our attention to the fact that you need people with varying expertises at the table. It strengthens your coalition, right? When we talk about people feeling included and having, I guess, what do I want to say? I guess dispersing the power or distributing the power, it works for that as well. But yeah, so thank you for that. There was another point you made. That's why I'm stumbling. I'm trying to buy myself some time. There was another point you made. Oh, yes. Okay. So how there's multiple buckets in that coalition, right, that we work on. Yeah, maternal and infant health. We have, I think childcare is in there. But how do we get those, right? We, at the top of every year, get together and determine what our goals are going to be for that year, right? We reevaluate that annually because just to ensure, like, oh, right, this is the coalition is here for the purpose of healthy families, getting families what they need. So what are our priorities for this year? And that can be really helpful when starting a coalition or in working in coalition as you continue to do that work, just to know that the goals that you set initially may shift and may change, as long as it's still within the banner of the work that you set the coalition up to do. So Tanesha, what do you have for us? What are some key things to consider when starting a coalition?
I think for me, the thing that I was sitting with before this, and then also listening to Tim and Diane, the piece of like, this takes time, and that we need people with specific expertise. And so I think that when it comes to like starting these things, like take your time and like allow the beginning stages of it to really reach communities you're trying to be a part of and like work with, and not rush the process. So that feeling of being involved, like, that's so important, I think, in coalition building, as like people are committed and like emotionally invested in this. And that feeling of being a part of something is really, really important. And I think that, you know, we live in a world where like our rights and our ability to like live happy lives is like constantly being under attack. It's constantly trying to be taken away from people. And so it's really easy to be like, okay, I'm going to build a coalition in like 2 weeks, and then we're going to do something. Cause that'd be like really great, you know, if it worked that way. But I think the thing that's been most important for me in doing this work is like really investing into the people who are there, and making sure that that is a part of that like strong, stable foundation of the coalition.
Well, I know me and Diane have a lot of experience with that one. But I'm going to go ahead and get us into the next question, and then that's a decent segue, which is why I'm moving on. Like moving on, but not really. Like I just want to pose this question, but also I'm going to bring it back to what you just said, Tanesha. So what should people consider when working in coalition, right? And definitely when starting and working in coalition, I'm going to summarize what Tanesha was saying. It's like maximizing, what I call maximizing the talents of people who you're working with. So if someone's interested in joining your coalition, you need to give them something to do immediately. And you need to figure out where they see themselves, where do they fit in, what can you give them immediately so that they have a feeling of belonging and also that they're valued, like that they're contributing to the coalition, to the work that's being done. So yes, to all that. So I'm going to kick it back to Tim, as you can start us off, even though I kind of just used it as a segue, but like, let's talk some more about working in coalition. Like, what should people be considering? Like, what should be in their priorities or things that they should be thinking about when working in coalition?
Well,
Tim or 10? Sorry, I get so confused.
say 10 or 10. I know. I thought you said 10.
I'm over here like, maybe y'all will work it out. I said Tim, but I am honestly like not opposed to either of you. Yeah, go ahead.
So I think you're totally right. Like if someone's coming, especially if you're bringing like, because I think one of the goals is always you should be looking for who, like one thing that you should consider when working in coalition is always being like mindful of who is not, like if we're talking about a proverbial table, who is not at the table, and how we should be bringing those folks in, and then like you're saying, like then making sure that they have adequate space and comfortability for input in a job or leadership opportunity for people who are existing and being brought in, so that they have a voice and space at the table. And also allowing your coalition to kind of adapt and grow and change, because I think change is good, particularly as you move from something that you maybe thought was only going to be for 1 year or 2 and it ends up being 10. Like you have to bend and mold as things sort of change, or as the timeline progresses. And then I think always being mindful of the sort of physical dynamics of the coalition, like where are you meeting, when are you meeting, is that accessible to people, is that a good time, a good space, especially now that we're kind of not really meeting in person, kind of all that accessibility sort of things, and then really consistent and open and transparent communication about what's going on, what's not going on, sort of process to goals, things like that, particularly from the whoever that sort of facilitating organization, if it is an organization that is the facilitator, or if it's an individual, or whoever's deemed as the person who is the head communicator, however you want to define it. Really that there is consistent and constant and clear communication.
Absolutely. I really love that you started us out on being consistent, I suppose, consistently thinking about who's not at the table. Again, like increasing inclusion, that definitely needs to be a thought. It's not always about who's there, it's like, who isn't here, right? And be thinking about how you can get those people there. What do you need to change? Why aren't they there, first and foremost? And what do you need to do to get them there? Maybe you need to change up the culture of the coalition. Maybe you need to just do something so simple as just reach out to them, right? Oftentimes, we start our coalitions with people we know already, right? But then like as you recruit people, the people you're recruiting should know other people and be reaching out to those people to bring them into the fold as well. And that's how a lot of the building happens, is through the individuals in the coalition reaching out, which is freaking fantastic. All right, so Diane and Tenacia, either one of you, what do you want to jump in and maybe like piggyback off something he said or add to that? before we move on?
Go ahead, Tanesha, if you have anything.
I think something that I was thinking about is that we don't always know who's going to be there in the group when we're like showing up, and like what people are going to want to be a part of it. And I think that is often a lesson for me of like, how do I act around X, Y, and Z kind of people, or what do I need to do to prepare myself to like have a really tough conversation with somebody I've been working with, and kind of like doing that self-reflecting part of like, how do I deal with conflict? Do we have somebody on our team who like knows how to do that? Do we need an intervention? Does this person like just need to like take a break? And like really being able to get clear on how we can show up as our best selves in spaces that can be challenging.
Thank you. That's actually really good. It took us like, Diane, how long before we started having conversations about like conflict resolution and like how are we going to resolve issues, because we were such a tight-knit group. And yeah, it got kind of wild there for a second. Like that is, thank you, Tanesha.
Hot buttery mess, as I like to say.
It was. Go
I
ahead.
think to your point, I think it's helpful to have those expectations as you're building what the ground rules are and the expectations of there will be conflict. How are we going to handle that conflict? And to Tim's point, not all coalitions, but the coalitions that do have an organizational background, they serve as the foundation. I think it's really important that that organization, whoever that person or person who's facilitating that, be as neutral as possible, because they inherently have more power. They are holding the purse strings, often the money, the location, the meeting location, housing the spaces, the food, transportation, things like that. And I think although coalitions are supposed to be flat, if it is has a background of an organization, that organization gets the credit for a lot of the work, right? And so I think it's really important that other organizations actually be listed first, right? And then the supporting organization might be sponsored by, right, but led by the other groups. Because I think it shows the power differential between what is considered a legit organization, one with a 501c3, and one that might not, who doesn't already have visibility. I think the other piece about thinking about how to support coalitions is, like Tim said about meeting times. Most of the times, folks that are most impacted can't meet the 9 to 5, right? And so are you going to have a 6 or 7 p.m. meeting? And will those agencies for people that work full time, can they get flex time, right? For those that are not involved, not full-time work, do they get a stipend? I also help out with the Black United Leadership Institute, which is a group of HIV organizers across the country. And we helped out with the pre-institute for a conference called HIV is Not a Crime. And one of the coalition members, and I'll name him because he worked in the HIV Justice Coalition, Devin Hersey, was really good about making sure that us as we're becoming a coalition, a leadership institute, made sure that we got funding so we could get paid to do this work, right? And I think it's really important as you're funding this stuff, forming this stuff, to put in line items for incentives, for transportation, for stipends, and even for stipends for folks that do this work full time, because I know that y'all have 4,000 things on your list that ends up just getting added on. Well, this is in your wheelhouse, you should do it. How can those folks also be compensated? I think that's a big thing that we miss out. We think just because somebody has a 9 to 5 or paid by our organization that they can suddenly afford to just do all this extra work. I think the other big piece, I named transportation, I named childcare, hybrid meetings. We're doing that more now anyway, particularly a lot of coalition work is usually regional or statewide. And I think the other piece is as much transparency as possible from whoever is either started the coalition or is leading the coalition. From a logistical standpoint, oftentimes there's different conversations happening with different people, and that any communication that happens with the group should go out to the entire group. The last thing I'll say, particularly thinking about commitment and morale, for this long-term work is, if possible, to recruit 2 people from an organization or an issue. What happens is we often have the one person who represents all, and there might be some conflict that's already there, or maybe they're gatekeeping, or maybe they're going to leave their job, or something will happen. So you have a touch point. Maybe not both people are fully involved, but they're at least in a communication thread. So if it's a larger organization, I recommend having 2 people that be the point of contact, and maybe they switch off back and forth of who goes to the meetings, or one person's the lead and they share the information back. Because oftentimes if somebody misses a meeting or somebody changes an organization, they're generally, I have not seen there be crossover. I try to bring somebody in and be like, I'm going to be gone, but please be here for the next 2 meetings. Oftentimes in a transition, they'll be like, this is my last meeting. My coworker will be here next week. And then the coworker shows up and they have no idea what's going on. So just to help prevent power differentials between the coalition, who is holding the purse strings as a liaison between the 2 organizations, and also for consistency.
Yeah, I really like that you brought up transparency as well. I was thinking about this in 2 ways. When you have, people who start organizations and they treat the organization as if it's their organization, when there's a board that's supposed to be in charge of the organization, right? And you went up against conflict there. And then, and I use that as the primary example because I know that most of the people who are probably watching us right now or tuning in or listening later, they can relate to that because that's a very common occurrence. But just take that example and bring it over to the coalition side, and like people who have founded coalition or start coalitions or lead the coalition, the organization that may be a fiscal sponsor or housing the coalition, sometimes takes ownership in ways that lacks transparency and creates problems within the coalition that don't need to be had. Because when you are involved in the work, it's important that everyone knows what's happening. And if you just bring that down to a human level, I've found in this life that if people are informed, their anxiety is less, it's decreased. Like people are like, you over-explain, child, look, I got anxiety. I know how I want people to feel me in, so I'm going to fill you in. Here's what we have coming up. Here's what's happening. Here are the decisions that need to be made. Here's the time I'm working on. Like, very thorough on that way because I want people to be like, woosah, right?
Yeah.
Despite me failing to send y'all a reminder email today. Apologies for that.
I would say one other quick thing related to that. I think it's also related to not assume that what folks aren't or are interested in knowing. We oftentimes don't share information for thinking that we're protecting somebody. Oh, they don't have the capacity. Oh, this might upset them. Oh, they're not interested, right? I would rather know and make the decision not to engage than have somebody make a decision for me. And I've seen that backfire like multiple times. So just be as upfront as possible.
Absolutely. All right. So, next question. What are, oh, come on. I'll do this. Okay. Move. I don't know why you're here or how you got here. Microsoft advertising. All right. What are some things people can do to ensure that coalitions are built responsibly and in consideration of the challenges that come with coalition building? So one more time for the people who are listening, all the panelists got these questions in advance, but what are some things people can do to ensure that coalitions are built responsibly and in consideration of the challenges that come with coalition building? All right, y'all. I'm gonna start with Tanesha. Kick us off. What are your thoughts around this?
That needs to be your intro when people call, just on your voicemail. Just
Yeah.
Yeah, I do a lot of singing. Bless my heart. Can't hit a note, but here we are.
We'll make it a side hustle. We'll make it work.
Just come. Okay, Tanesha, we play. Go ahead.
You're good. I think that, I'm gonna repeat something I was already said earlier, but like who's not at the table. I think like that, if we're building something like that should be like the first thing, like who's not here. And I also think that there's so many like different avenues for making movement spaces much more accessible and much more invested in like the immediate communities, and not like kind of doing like everywhere work, but being like, this is what I'm doing in like my town. And with that, I think there also comes this responsibility to like act on it. Like, don't be kind of like outsourcing people and you know, things that like are actually still right here, maybe even next door to you, and you just don't know about it, and they're definitely the person you should be working with, and not, you know, somebody you know, follow on Instagram who you really want to work with, when you have, you know, somebody just as amazing, you just don't know them yet. So I think that's kind of the thing that I'm sitting with right now.
In addition to that, just to add on, people who are like, no one's working on this. It's like, there's people working on everything. Just because you don't know who those people are. And if you don't know who those people are, take that as a moment to consider why you. Why should you be a person who's taking lead on this if you don't even know who's working on this, right? I'm gonna go to Diane.
I think that's kind of related. Made me think of pass the baton. We don't have to be everywhere all the time. And I think there's a lot of martyrism that happens in our movement spaces. If you don't have the capacity, or if it's not a good fit, say no. And I often try to say no and maybe hear somebody else, or maybe I can join for a couple meetings and help get a lay of the land and bring somebody with me. I think oftentimes we, like Avanya said, that we feel that we have to be in all the spaces doing all the things, and we get spread so thin. I think this happens in movement spaces. People get known for an individual versus a collective. And so as much as possible, when people are naming the work they do, to say we instead of I, because that collective will exist after you leave. And if it falls apart after you leave, that's not a coalition, that's a dictatorship. And I think, and I think the other piece is, you know, we were talking about who's at the table, and I'm not necessarily a fan of checklists, but sometimes it's helpful to literally have a list of who's here. I tell my clients that I work with, I'm a mixed, light-skinned, Black, cisgender woman. I hope I'm not the darkest, queerest person that organizations work with, right? Like, because I will be the safe person. I was like, I'm not going to be the safe Negro. I'm not going to be the safe queer person. I will maybe start agitating, but like, I'm going to connect you to folks that are more marginalized than I am. And so, and folks that are younger than I am. I think that's another thing in coalitions, in movement spaces. I think the shift has been happening, like particularly the last 5 years, but I'm 41, and folks, you know, when I moved to Kansas City, I was, 31, and then my mid-30s, people were asking me to like be on a youth panel. I'm like, I'm old enough to be someone's mama. So what does it mean that I, as a liaison between two communities, between two generations, can help bring in folks that are younger to that coalition and pass the baton on, and as somebody, but also can translate to folks that are older who see me as a young person. I think that's vitally important, that we see how can we be connected between two communities, and then give ourselves a timeline, and then step the hell away, and have a transition plan. Just don't disappear unless life happens, but try to have a succession plan and be able to pass the baton and say, I might be available if something comes up in the future, right? Maybe for a limited time, or if you need me for something, but I can't commit to this capacity as much as needed. I think we often think that coalition work is, any type of movement work is all or nothing. We are treading water trying to survive in this damn pandemic. The world is falling apart. And if we need to take space and take a step back, we do so. But how do we make sure that the momentum continues to do so we just don't all check out?
Yeah, so Tim, what do you have that you want to add or piggyback off of before I give my little 2 cents?
I mean, That's all great. I agree. I think no is a very hard word for a lot of people's vocabulary, and I strongly believe in the word no, particularly if it is if it's good for you. Like, and I think we all need to know when to take a step back and allow other people to shine, because I think that is really, particularly if other people are bringing unique and differing perspectives to the same work. I think you need you need everyone's perspective in order to continue movement work, to keep things moving forward. And so that's really, that's really the main thing I will add is I think no is a great word. Not all the time, but I think no is a really good word. And we need to know when to take a step back. And also just, so part of my work that I do now is I'm meeting with new folks and like trying to bring and forge new relationships with new organizations or people, and it being very clear and having clear expectations about what a potential new partnership and or mini coalition could look like. And so I think when forming or like in building how to build something responsibly, just being very clear about what those expectations would look like in a new partnership or a new coalition, both in the short term, like in the immediate, and then also thinking way ahead. So like, what can things look like maybe now, and then what could in a year look like? If my brain can think out past a year, like what does that sort of look like as well? So just having, and since we're kind of talking around bringing new people to the table, like just being very clear what those expectations are if bringing someone new in, so that you're not luring someone in under false pretenses.
Yeah, so that works on both ends. So if you are being asked to join a coalition, or whether you're the person asking someone to join a coalition, setting those clear expectations, questions that should be asked. What is that person's capacity? What are their skills? What are their talents? And what's the time commitment, right? Like, what is the commitment that you're asking them to make, and what commitment can they make? So for me, in thinking about building, giving like some very specific steps on how I go about this, what we're talking about here. So two things I want to make clear is what we're talking about here, like the challenges and obstacles that can come up in coalition building, and the things that we do in anticipation of those things, and also in response to those things. Right? Once you've been doing coalition work a little bit, you can anticipate things happening because you have experience with coalition. But even in not having experience with building a coalition, how you respond as things pop up is going to matter still for you, right? And ways that you can avoid a lot of problems is making sure that you have leadership diversity and that you're centering those who are most directly affected. So in the HIV coalition work that me and Diane were working on, making sure that people living with HIV were at the core of that work, that they were providing input for everything, right? No decisions, preferably, were being made without them, though they were, which was not about me and Diane. But, and then even, working with Tenacia with Reproaction, and also with Tim on the Right Time Initiative and the Healthy Families Coalition, bringing people with varying levels of expertise together, right? So you don't want both of those coalitions. I work with Tim on it, and with Reproaction, we have people who have skills in all kinds of things, knowledges in all kinds of things, but not necessarily in all kinds of things, but that are relevant to the issue. So specifically being, the example I'll give is like my work on the maternal and infant mortality campaign that I lead is making doulas, midwives, physicians, researchers, and people who have gone through, or who have either lost their child to infant mortality or maternal mortality or a sibling or something, like people who have experienced direct experience with that are sharing their stories and narratives, and that they are also at the table discussing what we want to do and how we want to come up with solutions and implement those solutions. So it's not, because I'm listening, and it's like I can see how people maybe could hear this and think, okay. But it's like, no, like all of these things are in anticipation of issues or in response to issues, and they can be diminished. A lot of issues can be diminished if you ensure that you have diverse people at the table, and diverse not just in terms of race, not just in terms of gender, but in sexuality, ability, if they're genderqueer as well. But you also want people of different classes, people of different ages, people with varying expertises at the table, people who have been doing movement work like, for a while, new people that you're doing leadership development, all of these things, right? Because the more diverse the coalition is, and I use the word diverse, but it just depends on what the coalition is for what diversity is going to look like specifically for you. Like who should be centered. Also, it's going to look different for the coalition. So a lot of people are like, oh yeah, who should be centered? Women of color always. And it's like, it depends on the issue now, right? For who should be centered. So just make sure that that's how you're hearing what's being said right now. Okay. So how do you navigate movement spaces that do not value working in coalition? So this is a little bit outside of forming a coalition or working in coalition. This is you're doing movement work. And again, the premise is that building people power is how we strengthen our movements, is how we build our movements, and working from that assumption means that coalitions should be formed, and that has to be a core part of the work. But how do you navigate movement spaces that do not value working in coalition? Gonna start with Diane for this one.
I knew it.
I'm just rotating. So you know you're next.
I'm gonna.
You can pass if you want.
No. I know what I think I'm gonna say.
Come on then.
So for me, I think I saw that in two different spaces. My first time that it kind of hit me about folks getting used in coalition work is when I started my first HIV job here in Long Beach at a storefront church, which was Unity Fellowship Church. Bishop Carl Bean actually just passed away a few weeks ago. Queer Black man who did a lot of really great work in HIV housing, particularly in spiritual care. And the LGBTQ Center, which is down the street from my house now, reached out to us for Black History Month because they wanted their diversity quota, right? The organization hadn't reached out and collaborated for any other reasons, right? Hadn't really had much partnership with us. And so for me, that was a marker of one, how much racism was in the queer community, but two, that there was a discord between what was happening in HIV work here in Long Beach when I lived here the first time. And so what I did is I started having conversations with other white queer folks that were involved in HIV work to kind of understand what had happened and what had not happened. I also had the conversations, particularly with Black folks that were doing HIV work, just to understand, like, is my spidey sense right? Or has this been a long going history? So I try to understand what's happening before jumping in and making moves. The second time it happened that I can clearly remember is when I first moved to Kansas City, and I was trying to get the lay of the land, figuring out, who all the activists were, and I was getting to know folks that did immigrant rights work. And I noticed that the organizations were not led by folks that were either immigrants or undocumented themselves. And also, too, the organizations didn't necessarily work together because there had been this long history and tension. So the way I navigated that was to get to know all the organizations, and through my own work doing anti-police brutality work and HIV work, how could I help be in space for folks that did immigration work? How could I help amplify their narratives, and also figure out ways because, organization turnover changes. How could I help navigate people that were maybe new to organizations and maybe didn't want to be involved in quote unquote the drama? How could I be in support of their work? Because people will disappear. They're like, there's drama, I'm going to bounce. And so I was like, that might not be where you want to be right now because it's a hot, buttery mess, but I don't want you to leave the work. And how can I figure out how to help support you until there's turnover or there's more momentum or a new organization comes up? So for me, it's about, I try to sit back and just try to understand what's going on first. And then when there is the challenge itself, Vanya knows this because I've had her, I mean, she came into the coalition because of this. We all have our different wheelhouses. Somebody who is self-employed now and I'm not working with the organization, I know I have a privilege to like just pop off at the mouth if needed. I know it's helpful, but I also know that people that are in organizations can leverage and push in ways that I can't. And so as somebody who worked for an organization who did reproductive justice work, I made sure I was like, if Avanya is not speaking, we need to talk about reproductive justice and we need to make sure why those people aren't at the table. And the last thing I'll say to that is, you know, everybody has their different skill sets, and to understand that oftentimes what is being said in the coalition might not be what folks are feeling in the coalition, and to have subcommittees to be able to kind of have the meetings in between the meetings to talk about the progress, so everything just doesn't like pop off when you meet together once a month or once a quarter. What does the relationship building look like in between the work, and how are you supporting other people's organizations? You're not just going to an organization like, hey, come over here. Maybe you show up to their organization first, to their event, get to know people, and then ask them to join and say like, hey, just come witness, come view. It is not a commitment, to let people make the decision whether they want to join or not. I know it wasn't the most direct answer, but that's what I have at the moment.
No, that's good. That's good. So absolutely. So Tanesha and Tim, if y'all want to add to this, oh, just 1 second. Mevi, let me see if, okay, she dropped off. So it was like she was on for a second there. And just an FYI, she thought this was 3 p.m. Central Time instead of Eastern. That's the confusion working with Reproaction. We send everything out in Eastern Time regardless, but everybody here is in a different time zone. We got East, Central, and West Coast. So I get it. It can definitely be confusing. I was like, it's just better to just send it in one time zone. Okay, so I really do appreciate that. And the assumption here with this question, like, how do you navigate movement spaces that do not value working in coalition? I think the addendum that you put in there, which very important, love that you took it there, is that it's not necessarily that people don't value working in coalition. It's just that they go about it wrong. They go about it in ways that don't show that they value the people that they're working with, the value people that who are most directly affected by the issue. And that can create a lot of unnecessary drama, problems, issues. So Tanesha and Tim, like, how do y'all navigate movement spaces that don't value working in coalition? Like, it can be individuals, people, leaders. What does that look like for you, Tim?
So this is bringing up memories from a previous coalition that I facilitated back in before I was at MFHC. I worked with Planned Parenthood here in St. Louis, and one of the coalitions that we operated in was when we were implementing the Affordable Care Act and trying to get people to health insurance. And we would routinely go like out into the world and try and bring other people in, try and essentially enroll people in health insurance. And we would get a lot of pushback just because I would go and say, hi, my name is Tim. I'm with Planned Parenthood, and people would be like, oh no, we can't, that's not kosher for me. And so one way we would try and work around that is work around with those people who we were working with in coalition about who is the best messenger for that information, because we know people aren't, I can't get 2 words out of my mouth before people would automatically I couldn't even tell them what I'm here to talk about. And so we're in coalition, we're all working towards this shared goal. And this goal was giving people information about health insurance, health literacy, Medicaid, you name it. If we're going to a group that is maybe I'm not the best messenger because of who I work for, is there another group that is the best messenger that we can work for, that is a good messenger? And then when if we do an event, if they come to a meeting, if they do all that stuff, we can then come together as the broader sort of coalition to do X, Y, and Z, whatever that looks like. And so that's bringing back flashbacks of getting lots of doors pushed in my face because of those sort of situations. But and then also, like, if someone says no, I always kind of would think about, well, what is that no from? I know I talked earlier about like no is like a good word. We should always use no, but like, why is someone saying no? Is it just a time and capacity issue, or is there a deeper sort of rooted meaning behind that? Is there an organizational pushback behind the reason why they can't join, or is it individual? Like, what is that rationale behind why they can't join? And if it really is a hard no, then I'm not gonna beat a dead horse. But if there is some sort of way to work around, if it's a time or capacity thing, like trying to be more flexible and adaptable to try and bring people into the group.
Tanesha, you want to add something or piggyback off anything that's been stated previously? Because just to remind you, like, the question is, how do you navigate movement spaces that do not value working in coalition? And like, I'm just thinking in terms of like, who do you tend to receive pushback or resistance from, and how do you work to get these people on board, or do you, right? Like, I don't always do that.
Yeah, I think specifically talking about like who and like when is pushback happening. I've kind of seen like two very opposite ends of working with like all Black folks, and Black folks being like, I don't want white people here. I don't want to work in coalition. And me being like, okay, like that's fair. Like, I'm not gonna be like, you have to try this. And also like white people being like, oh, I don't want to like have somebody tell me about myself. Like, I can't be in this space. I don't know how to be in this space. And I think there is so much to kind of like unpack in like both of those instances. But I think, you know, something, Tim, you were saying, like, why are people saying no? Like, why is there this hesitation? I think, like, we need to interrogate that, like, and like have those conversations with people. And I don't know how you get people to get on board, to be honest. I have never been the person in my circles to put energy into that. I'm not the one to sit with somebody and like kind of talk through stuff with them. And I know that about my skill set. And, you know, I'm all for the motto of, not a motto, but just like, do what you feel comfortable doing. And if you don't feel comfortable doing something, you don't have to be a part of it. I'm not going to hold it against you. And if you want to interact in a different way, like down the line in this work, like that's fine. But like sometimes it's just not worth the like 2.5 hour like FaceTime at 3 o'clock in the morning talking to someone to work through things. And it's okay. I've in the past practiced like, it's okay if you don't do this. I appreciate that, but like we're gonna keep moving forward and like letting people know that they can come in and out.
Mm-hmm. Does anybody want to add anything before we get to this last question?
I think the one thing I'll add, thinking about, I appreciate that you mentioned when we're doing work within our own community, and particularly thinking about race, and that we could apply this to like sexuality, like are straight people, should they be in queer spaces? Should men be in, you know, cis women's spaces or women's spaces or non-binary spaces, whatever that may look like, right? And I think folks have particularly if we're thinking about impacted communities, there's very legit reasons why their answer might initially be no, right? And I think it's important to honor that, but also to figure out a way to possibly give space, like Tim said, for folks to name why their answer is no. But if it's really important that these folks be involved in the coalition, can there be relationship building outside of the coalition in and of itself, right? So if it's Black folks that don't want to work with white folks, maybe there is Black only spaces, right? And maybe once a month or once a quarter that there is like a mixed race space, right? And that could be maybe a breakout space or a work group or an affinity group. So people can have both, and white folks, in that space won't put the burden on the BIPOC folk to understand their whiteness. And that would be an opportunity for white leaderships, folks that do anti-racist, white folks that do anti-racist work to, as I say, like collect your folk, like white people whispering, right? Like that's an opportunity if white folks are afraid to be in space with Black and brown people, or straight people are afraid to be in space with queer people, like that onus is not on the marginalized folk. The onus is on the folks that have the most power. Well, you can't just get up and leave because it's uncomfortable. And this a marker that they probably won't stay with the coalition. So how can we help organize some space where you can figure that out with your people, so you're not taking away the energy in the middle of the coalition meeting because you're unpacking your shit.
Cool. All right, so I'm just going to open it up to all of you for the last question, speaking whatever turn that you want to, if you have anything to add here. And that's, what types of support and from whom would make building coalitions easier in your work? Not all at once.
Unrestricted funding.
All the money, yeah, that's good.
Unrestricted funding, and I also say in-kind donations. Like folks think that donations often has to be just money. I know we're living in the Rona, we're still in hybrid, but when we are in person, like if you have access to a conference room, or if you have extra, depending on the type of coalition, if you have extra space in a community, like offer that room, offer to pick up food, offer to cover part of the food. There's offered childcare due to, obviously due to liability issues, kids can't be in another space as their guardians, but maybe they're in the back of the room and there's some teenagers or young adults or somebody who is maybe a partner of somebody. They don't want to participate in the coalition, but they can help provide childcare and activities or donate child activities. I think there's a lot of ways that people can contribute and help coalition work without feeling like you have to just show up to a meeting and be the face of and do, because really the grunt work is on the back end.
Thank you for that. Always glad.
As someone that had to provide food on a limited budget for a coalition, food is very necessary, and people look forward to that kind of stuff and are happy when like real food outside of like cookies and carrot sticks would show up.
Come on now.
So
Cookies and carrots and hummus.
Yeah, I can tell you that so like on days when we would splurge, like I could only buy like a cake and pizza for like one meeting when we would like celebrate something. And so on those days, like everyone would show up. Like that's when everyone would be there. And so if you can promise that food would be at an event, then but if we're talking about food.
All right. Yeah, Tanesha?
I think I don't know how to word this. I really want white people with generational wealth to like actually invest in the organizing in their communities, not just for a summer. That's what would make, I think, this work easier for me, to be honest, is to like genuinely be like, yeah, I have thousands of dollars from, years and years of colonialism and white supremacy that I'm benefiting from. So I'm going to give it to people who are doing something. That would be my thing.
Money's important. Also, giving the money without strings attached, right? A lot of times people giving money, they want to control how the money's used, where it's used. Like if you're giving a homeless person money and you're like, oh, I don't want to give homeless people money, they make them spend it on alcohol. So, okay. Like give money if you're gonna give it. You gotta dictate like where it's going, or do it in good faith, operate in good faith. If you have an issue, like Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Because we probably said the same thing. No, go ahead.
We were saying the same thing. You're good.
No, just like, yeah, and if you're giving to an organization, why would you be giving to an organization that you don't trust to spend the money responsibly, right? Why are you even giving? Why are you doing that? Let's question that, right? Yeah. So anyways, considering that, we have one question that's probably I need y'all to focus right now. It's very long and I'm gonna read all of it. All right, so inhale, exhale, breathe, follow me. All right. If I can stop touching my screen and making it disappear. All right. So, do you all have strategies for pushing coalition backbone orgs, especially larger, well-funded ones, to be accountable to certain communities of people before those communities are invited in to participate in coalitions? And they say they've noticed in different coalitions that while diverse partners and messengers are always mentioned as critical to achieving goals, it feels almost violent to do so if they are not being centered in those policies or legislation in that the coalition is working on. So going back to the original question, do you all have strategies for pushing coalition backbone orgs to be accountable to certain communities of people before those communities are invited in to participate? Like, how do you, because we were talking about recruitment and bringing people in, but like, before you get certain groups in, like, how do you go about that? How do you hold them accountable? Anyone have any ideas about that? Or do I need to ask this person to maybe clarify? Are we clear on what's being asked?
I'm all for just naming the shits, but I know I have a big mouth. I'm also a big fan of a reply all, and I'm confused, but why blah, 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 or help me understand why blah, 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 blah. I think, I wouldn't say it's a direct strategy, but I think it's really important to stop the work if needed, and to spend the time to actually do authentic engagement, because if the coalition gets going and it gets around town or around the area or the community that those folks haven't been included, if you try to include people later on, people will not trust you and or they won't stay, or they'll just go do their own thing anyway, right? So there's often this sense of urgency. Yes, this work needs to be addressed, but if you don't slow the hell down and get more than just one person from a said demographic, people will tell real quick that it's transactional and it's not authentic. So actually stopping the work in maybe the formal meetings, but shifting the work. I don't want to say stop the coalition, but shifting the work to spend the time that it could take months, maybe even a year or two, to get people from those said communities. And like I said, invite people in. Don't say, hey, come in for a year. Hey, come check us out. Let me know. And circle back with somebody after they've come to a meeting. Circle back and say, hey, how did it work for you? And keep that information in confidence.
I agree with that. Tanesha or Tim, y'all have anything y'all want to add? You want me to read it again? Not the whole thing,
No.
but just the question?
No, yeah, that's totally fine. I totally agree, and I think it's just I love just naming it and being very clear from that, like having very clear expectations from the get-go, and also having, if where possible, having some sort of mechanism for coalition members to hold the facilitating organization accountable for whatever structures were put in place or guidelines, so that if they're not holding up to their end of the bargain, that there is whether there's, like we were talking about earlier, there's like some sort of conflict resolution in place, or there is a subcommittee that's in place from the get-go that holds them accountable, so that those conversations are happening from the start. And then if it's not working, that there is a process in place to, move aside or whatnot. Yeah.
I don't think I have anything to add that hasn't already been said. I agree with both Tim and Diane.
Cool. I don't know if my 2 cents needs to be added either, but I'll add it anyway. And I've already said it, but when thinking about movement work, I'll phrase it in a different way so it doesn't sound repetitive, but you're getting it, right? Is that this work is, I mean, on an individual term, it's a lifelong journey, right? So you grow, you make mistakes, but you grow. So when holding people accountable, you want to be aware that you didn't always know what you knew. So you want to do it in responsible ways that aren't always calling people out. Sometimes you got to call people in, right? But you have, if you're doing movement work, then you have to possess a level of compassion, or else you wouldn't be here. So yeah, extend grace. Maybe they're unaware. Maybe they think this is what they have to do. A lot of organizations that maybe house coalitions, they're just doing what they've always done. They don't see any problems with it because it's just what they've always done. So conversations may need to be had on like how we can improve and not get stagnant and get stuck in doing things in ways that don't work anymore. So just thinking about that growth, extending grace as we all grow, right? And for me, going back, I think I said this in the last the last panel discussion, ask questions. Sometimes people, they give them an opportunity to explain their thought process. While they're explaining their thought process and they can hear themselves, how foolish they sound, you don't even have to say it. They've said it. Like, you just ask the right questions to get them to really think through their reasoning, or how they came up with this protocol, and who's it really helping and benefiting. And then the last thing I'll say is that keeping in mind that, like, if we're not actively doing these things, like, we're wrapping up this panel discussion. Again, we talked about leadership diversity, centering the most marginalized, which also means centering those most directly affected by an issue. And now we're talking about coalition building. If we must actively do these things, right? There is no point that you reach where the work is done. And there is no point that you reach where you know everything that there is to know. You're growing, the people you're working with are growing. And it's just important that we extend grace not only to others, but ourselves while we do this work. And, not be a burden to people, right? Like, just, this work should be fun. It should be fun. It should be joyful. Yeah, it's stressful, but it's stressful because we care, right? It's stressful because we want to see changes. And we all know that things don't have to be the way that they are. But sometimes it can be very, very stressful, particularly if you have a marginalized identity or identities, which opposing white supremacy and all of the ways that it breaks off into sexism, patriarchy, and classism, and transphobia and homophobia, and et cetera, because I know I forgot some. The way that it breaks off, like, it's the default, right? White supremacy is the default if we are not actively opposing it. So keeping that in mind, that when things come up and you recognize it and you see it, say something, because, and not because it has to be you, but just that, like Diane said, sometimes we need to stop. We need to just press pause and make sure that we're doing the work as effectively, as efficiently, and as sustainably as we possibly can. So I don't see any more questions in the box. Definitely comments. The person who wrote that question did say that the feedback was very helpful. So kudos to y'all. And apologies to Mevi for putting you on camera. I did not read the full message, and they did not want to put me on camera. Sorry. So yeah, y'all got 2 minutes. So take 30 seconds to let people know how they can contact you, where they can find you. Tanesha, go.
You can follow me on Twitter at DJ Dump Them. That's pretty much the only social media I'm on. I was a radio host, DJ Dump Them in college, so it just followed me.
All right. And then Tim.
I'm not on Twitter, so apologies. But the best way would just be through email. So you can email me anytime at twilliams at mfhc.org.
My consulting business is the DB approach, my initials, which is on social media. My best way to get hold of me is via email, which is my first name, Diane.Burkholder@gmail.com. And then the HIV Justice Coalition. I know the meetings are probably not still happening in Missouri. Maybe they are, Vivanya, maybe they are. There is a Facebook page. You can see kind of the ebbs and flows of the coalition over the year and get more information about HIV criminalization. I believe there's 26 states where HIV is still criminalized. Folks that are living with HIV, even if using condom, even if undetectable, can still get charged with heinous crimes and exorbitant sentences for just merely trying to exist and be joyous.
So I'll shout out for myself. If you want to reach me, my name is not up here in the box, Ivania at Reproaction, EVONNIA at reproaction.org. If you'd like to email me, I'm on all social media, but I don't need you following me. If you find me and you follow me, that's fine. Reproaction, check out our website, reproaction.org. You can email us at reproaction at reproaction.org. If you want to follow up, join our listserv from our website and keep up with what we're doing. That way you can sign up there. You'll get the Activism and Joy newsletter. You'll get our roundups and plenty of opportunities for you to take action to continue to push reproductive justice issues. So with that, we're wrapping. I think my appreciation, gratitude goes to the panelists. Thank y'all so much for this fruitful conversation. And I also want to extend my appreciation to the people who showed up live today. And if you are listening to this post October 7th, 2021, thank you for listening. All right, bye y'all.
Bye.